The deep dive begins with what looked like, a typical skip trace case, a simple missing persons inquiry.
Mm-hmm.
We received this stack of sources detailing the disappearance of a young student. And if that were the whole story, it would probably be done in about 10 minutes.
Yeah, pretty open and shut.
But as we started unwinding that first thread, we realized pretty quickly we weren't just looking for a missing person. We were looking for a secret the government was, well, desperate to keep buried.
And that missing person is Leonore Salger. Her friends called her Leo. She was a young woman studying French and English at the prestigious Heidelberg Institute for Translation and Interpretation.
Right.
Her absence was first noted because she just didn't show up for the start of the new semester. So she'd been gone for about 2 weeks when our investigator was first hired.
Okay, so let's unpack that first scene, because that is really where the entire structure of deception is just laid bare.
Absolutely.
The client, who introduces himself as Herr Salger from Bonn, he immediately triggered every single alarm bell in the investigator's professional life.
This was not a distressed father. Not at all.
No. He paid an exorbitant fee, 5,000 marks, and he insisted on paying it all in cash.
5,000 marks. And you have to think about the time period here. Paid up front and in cash is less about getting the job done fast and more about, well, guaranteeing complete and utter discretion.
It's hush money.
It's absolutely hush money. The client was paying to purchase the investigator's silence, or at the very least, his unquestioning loyalty. That sheer volume of cash just signals high stakes right from the very first handshake.
But I guess you'd call it deliberate sabotage, it didn't stop at the payment. He was actively running defense against the investigator he just hired.
Yeah, that's bizarre.
He refused to provide any useful contact information. All he offers is this unlisted answering machine number, 411788.
This is basically a dead end, a one-way communication channel.
Exactly. And when the investigator asks for his daughter's Heidelberg address, I mean, the most basic piece of information you could possibly need, the client responds with, irritation. He basically demands the investigator do the work himself and not bother him with the details.
And that right there is the foundational dishonesty of the entire case. Why would you hire a professional to find your daughter if you are actively safeguarding your own privacy from him?
It makes no sense.
None. If you're paying a massive premium to keep yourself hidden from the one person who is supposed to be working for you, it instantly signals that this isn't just about a missing person. It's about high stakes dishonesty, possibly, criminal activity, and the client himself is right in the middle of all the secrecy.
Absolutely. So moving into Leo's actual profile, what did we know about her before this whole cover-up really began?
Well, the sources paint a picture of someone who was independent, clearly followed her own convictions. She was in a very rigorous program at the Institute, so she was smart.
Yeah.
But there's a key structural crack in her academic life that's an early clue. She had been an assistant to a professor later at the Translation Institute, which is a position of some responsibility.
Right, not just a student.
Exactly. But she left that position back in February, months before she officially went missing in April when the semester was supposed to start. So that 3-month gap from February to April suggests she didn't just drop out of her studies on a whim. She was deliberately cutting ties with her established life well in advance of this investigation ever starting.
So our sources then plunge us directly into a setting that is just riddled with institutional irony. The investigator, he starts his search at the Translation Institute itself, speaking with that same professor later, Leo's former boss.
And Leiter is quite a character. He's a high-level scholar of linguistics, but he is profoundly cynical about the very subject he teaches.
How so?
He views translation and interpretation, the art of finding meaning across these cultural and linguistic divides, as a muddle. Just a temporary problem that science will eventually solve when we finally figure out the true mechanism of language.
That's an incredible piece of, institutional satire. The man leading the charge for global communication fundamentally despises the messy human process of it.
It's like having a highly placed government official who's actively trying to dismantle his own department.
Exactly.
And while he's expressing all this contempt, he happens to mention these government and ministry youth initiatives, a program called the Young Translators.
Uh-huh.
It was supposed to be a high-profile boost for the translation departments, sort of following on established programs like, Young Scientist. And Leo, as Leiter's former assistant, was recommended for this, possibly to serve as a student representative.
So Leo, this young independent student, was already on the radar for state-level initiatives. Eve was just on the periphery. This establishes an early link to the machinery of government.
Correct. And that link is what makes her disappearance so politically volatile later on. This also explains why Leiter, given his cynicism, was so openly ambivalent about the whole program. It suggests he didn't really care who was involved, just that the ministry wanted it done.
So from the ivory tower of the Institute, the investigator hits the streets, trying to track Leo's actual physical footsteps. And the question is, when did she really vanish?
The initial fieldwork immediately contradicted what the client said. Leo had been missing since January, not just since the semester started in April.
A huge difference.
Massive. She was known to frequent a place called the Drugstore Bar in Kettengasse. The staff there confirmed she hadn't been seen since January. And here's a really critical detail. Someone else, an unidentified person, had also been looking for her back in February.
So 2 separate parties were trying to find her months before the investigator was even hired.
Which implies that the imposter client wasn't the first person to realize she was gone. Or maybe he was trying to track her himself for months before finally hiring professional help.
Which then leads to the visit to the student residence hall on Klausenpfad. And this is where the detective work gets a little theatrical.
It does. The investigator had to use a classic deception tactic. He pretended to be her dear old uncle, claiming he was putting together a family photo album for her father's upcoming birthday.
Calculated move.
Oh, completely. It's designed to lower the guard of her roommates, who were described as, polite, well-behaved students, basically the total antithesis of Leo's radical tendencies. They confirmed she was a good person, but they did note her contact with her parents was limited, and as a small hint of her independent streak, that she smoked.
But those seemingly mundane details lead directly to the critical piece of physical evidence that just changes the trajectory of the entire case.
The mugshot.
The mugshot clue.
Exactly. One of her friends, a woman named Andrea, had a photograph. And it wasn't a typical dorm photo, but a very specific, defining image. It showed Leo coming out of the Heidelberg police headquarters in July, several months earlier. And she looked furious. Her mouth was a tight, defiant line. She had just been arrested and fingerprinted after a demonstration. And this single photograph confirms, without any doubt, Leo's definitive, documented link to anti-establishment political action. This isn't just a troubled student anymore. This is a known radical.
Which immediately confirms that the client, this Herr Selger, was actively concealing not just her location, but her entire political history. So the investigator had to move to unmask the man who paid him 5,000 marks in cash. Was he even a government official?
Unsurprisingly, the identity was completely fraudulent. A check with the state government offices in Düsseldorf and Nordrhein-Westfalen confirmed it. No one named Undersecretary Salger worked there.
Just a fabrication.
But total fabrication. The imposter had chosen a name designed to suggest Bonn political weight and government power, but it was pure fiction.
So the investigator had to find the real Salger history to understand the deep, deep roots of this deception. And this leads us to a key source, a journalist in Bonn named Breuer, who provides the just devastating backstory of Leo's actual father.
Right. The real Mr. Salger, Leonore's father, had died years ago from cancer. But his life was defined by this massive trauma tied directly to institutional betrayal. He was a government official in Bonn who got caught up in the infamous financial scandal involving German loans to Biafra.
Okay, can we pause there for a moment just to give our audience a sense of the weight of the Biafra scandal in German politics at that time?
Of course. The Biafra region was, heavily involved in conflict and poverty, and these loans were being routed through various international and governmental channels. When the scandal broke, it wasn't just about money, it was about political corruption and the moral integrity of the entire post-war German bureaucracy.
And Mr. Salger was right in the middle of it.
He was falsely suspected, brutally interrogated, and then incarcerated for 6 months while the investigation played out. 6 months in prison for a crime he did not commit.
And the true culprit?
The sources confirmed the culprit was a man named Koenig who had misappropriated the funds. Koenig committed suicide before the verdict to be delivered, which, in this really twisted way, finalized the public's conviction of Salger in their minds, even though Salger was technically exonerated later.
But he was the one who blew the whistle initially.
He was. He had been the one who pointed out the irregularities in the first place, trying to be the honest voice in a corrupt system.
The psychological fallout for him must have been just catastrophic.
It was. He was cleared, but the social and professional damage was irreparable. He just couldn't cope with the hypocrisy of his colleagues, the very people who had initially suspected him, interrogated him, shunned him. He became completely isolated, resigned from the government at age 50, tried a small, futile political campaign with the Free Democratic Party that went absolutely nowhere, and then spent his last years writing an unpublished book about his experiences.
So he just retreated.
Completely. He lived off a substantial private fortune, but his integrity, his spirit, it was shattered.
That is the crucial context for Leo's later radicalism, isn't it? She didn't grow up in a happy, secure political household. She grew up in the shadow of institutional betrayal and martyrdom. Her own father was destroyed by the German state, not some foreign enemy.
Precisely. His resignation, his isolation, his futile fight, those were the seeds of Leo's defiance. If her own father, an established government insider, couldn't find justice or integrity within the system, why on earth would Leo believe in it at all?
This tragic political history then leads the investigator to the Salger family home in Bonn 46A, a large house that had apparently been a haberdashery. The mother, Frau Salger, is the only remaining relative, and the scene there is just deeply upsetting.
It paints a picture of complete personal collapse. The investigator finds Frau Salger passed out drunk on the terrace drinking gin. Her face is etched with these deep furrows that had just wiped away any trace of youth or mirth.
She was barely responsive.
Barely. She confirmed her daughter disappeared, and then she hinted that the situation occurred right after he went.
That phrase, right after he went, is so ambiguous but incredibly heavy. Did she mean after her husband died, suggesting Leo fled the family grief? Or did she mean after the imposter, Lemke, first got involved with her?
Given the timeline, it seems more likely to be tied to the father's death and the ensuing vacuum of purpose in Leo's life. But regardless, the mother's state just solidifies this idea that Leo came from a broken home, plagued by the consequences of political failure and personal despair. This environment made her incredibly susceptible to a charismatic, ideological figure like Lemke.
And now the imposter's choice of identity makes perfect sense.
Yes. He needed a name with Bonn political weight and a known history of family trauma and public scandal, a ready-made narrative of victimization that he could just step into.
So following the paper trail of this missing student who was arrested at a demonstration, the search unexpectedly leads the investigator to the state psychiatric hospital outside Heidelberg. And this is a place he was clearly reluctant to visit.
His reluctance wasn't just, arbitrary. It was deeply personal and based on a horrific institutional memory. He recalled his friend Eberhard's stay there decades earlier, and he describes the old conditions as truly awful, almost like a prison.
What was it like?
Patients were crammed into these huge rooms, sleeping in double-decker beds. They were stripped of all personal identity. Their watches, wedding rings, all personal belongings were taken away.
And the sensory memory of that place is just visceral in the source material.
Yes, it emphasizes this pervasive, sickening smell, a potent, unforgettable blend of food, cleansing agents, disinfectants, urine, sweat, and fear. That cocktail of smells is the literal sensory signature of institutional neglect and hopelessness.
Yet the sources make a crucial point. The institution had undergone a total physical and philosophical overhaul since then.
It had. The shift reflected a major development in modern psychiatry, moving away from simple incarceration towards a model of healing and integration. The investigator noted the dramatic contrast. Now there were lawns, benches, patients wore everyday clothes, a far, far cry from the gray, prison-like overalls of Eberhard's time.
Well, that contrast is vital, isn't it? It shows that even in its seemingly modern, humane presentation, the hospital could still be weaponized for high-stakes political concealment. The physical improvements were just masking a deeper institutional corruption.
Exactly.
So the investigator speaks with the hospital staff, and the initial story they spin is, well, transparently suspicious.
He deals first with the Dr. Wendt, the young doctor on duty, and later the director, Dr. Eberlein. Wendt reluctantly admits that Leo had been a patient there, placed under a false name. Then comes the bombshell. Wendt claims she had died 2 weeks prior, supposedly falling from an unsecured fourth-floor window.
The investigator's immediate reaction is skepticism, which is entirely justified by the details of their cover-up.
Well, the most damning detail wasn't the fall itself. It was the complete lack of official procedure. Wendt admitted the police were not notified. Only ambulances were called.
How did he even try to justify that?
He tried to justify it by citing patient confidentiality and therapeutic reasons, claiming police involvement would have been utterly inappropriate. But the investigator cuts right through this. He realizes that if a death had occurred on state property, a police investigation would have instantly exposed Leo's false identity and led them straight to the real Salger family history, which the state apparatus was clearly trying to keep quiet.
The hospital was being used to run cover.
No question. And Dr. Wendt, the doctor running the cover, carries this incredible explosive history himself.
Right, his background.
Wendt was deeply embroiled in the history of German left-wing extremism. He was exposed as a former member of the Socialist Patient Collective, or SPK, at age 17, and associated with the much more violent Red Army faction, the RAF.
For our listeners who might not be familiar, what exactly was the SPK? What did the Socialist Patient Collective stand for?
The SBK was a fascinating and, frankly, terrifying radical group from the 1970s. Their central ideology was that illness was not a biological phenomenon, but a direct product of capitalist oppression and state violence.
So they politicized medicine.
They turned medicine into a weapon. They argued that the only way to treat the illness was to destroy the system that was causing it, so they effectively radicalized patients, turning psychiatric illness into political resistance. And they had direct links to the RAF, providing support and sometimes even recruitment.
So for Wendt to be connected to them means he wasn't just a casual student protester. He was an ideologically committed extremist who saw the psychiatric facility itself as a tool in the political struggle.
Absolutely.
So how did a man with an RAF-adjacent background get vetted and hired at a sensitive state hospital position? Was the state just, incompetent?
Not incompetent, maybe. Conflicted. Dr. Eberlein, the director, later provided this very nuanced profile of Wendt. He described him as clever, sensitive, and a profoundly competent perfectionist.
An odd combination.
It is. Eberlein noted that Wendt intentionally shielded himself from stress by limiting his personal life, which led to his unhappiness. But this self-imposed isolation also gave him immense empathy for the unhappiness of others. This suggests the hospital director valued his competence and empathy so highly that he perhaps overlooked or rationalized the political risk.
But it also paints a picture of a man who is emotionally ripe for a self-destructive attachment.
Which brings us to the devastating truth of Leo's time there. The hospital was a politically compromised safe house.
The diagnosis was fake.
The severe depression diagnosis was a complete medical fiction. Wendt had fallen in love with Leo. He established the hospital as a temporary hiding place for her, a way to get her off the grid and protected from the authorities who knew she'd been arrested at that demonstration. And then, following her supposed death and release, he arranged for her to work as an au pair in a town called Amorbach. His role wasn't medical at all. It was logistical and political facilitation. It was the ultimate blurring of lines between radical ideology and a state institution.
This dangerous web of secrecy, though, it abruptly snaps. Dr. Wendt is murdered.
He was found shot in the chest, a very small, dark red hole in his light raincoat, under an Autobahn bridge in Weiblingen.
The detail of the small, precise wound.
It suggests a close-range execution rather than a messy struggle. It indicates the killer was efficient and likely knew Wendt.
And the evidence found with him is sparse, but it's technical. It's clearly signaling a high-level operation.
Yes. His calendar was empty for that afternoon, which suggests the meeting he went to was either unplanned or highly secret, no paper trail allowed. But more critically, he was carrying a cryptic map.
The map without names.
Exactly. A map of an area with no place names, just divided into numbered squares. The source cites examples like 203, 537, 425, 113, and it's bisected by these double lines.
What's the significance of those details? Why use specific coordinates and double lines on a map like that?
This is a classic military or intelligence grid. Place names are eliminated to prevent easy identification by anyone who isn't supposed to see it. The numbered squares are coordinate points for operational planning or targeting. And the double lines, they strongly imply a boundary, a restricted area, perhaps a military fence line, or some other highly sensitive zone. This map immediately connects Wendt's murder directly to the clandestine event Leo was involved in, and it elevates the stakes from a personal tragedy to a matter of state security.
And once the body drops, the state finally stops pretending. This is the moment the official federal agencies just sweep in.
Precisely. Agents Bleckmeyer and Rawitz from the agency, the Federal Criminal Investigation Agency, they appear. They bypass the local police entirely, which demonstrates who has the true jurisdictional authority here.
And they know who they're dealing with.
Oh, they do. They immediately signal their knowledge of the investigator's past by calling him Dr. Self, which confirms they've run background checks and they know his history as a public prosecutor. They demand Leo's whereabouts, hinting that the underlying political situation is far, far more serious than a simple missing student. The state is now officially mobilized to manage, control, and cover up whatever happened.
To understand what Leo did and why the state is mobilizing like this, we have to circle back to the central puppet master, Helmut Lemke, the charismatic figure who impersonated her dead father.
Lemke was a legend in the Heidelberg radical circles during that explosive period of 1967-68. He had this incredible personal magnetism, known for rallying SDS students for democratic society crowds. His power lay not just in ideology, but in pure performance.
The anecdote about the opposing chants in the sources, it captures his theatrical genius perfectly.
It's a wonderful piece of writing. When the right-wingers would chant, "Sieg Heil Lemke," using his name ironically or antagonistically, he wouldn't shy away from it.
He'd lean into it.
He'd take command of the timing, and he'd lead the counter-chorus of Ho, Ho, Ho Chi Minh. His mastery of crowd psychology was so complete that he could turn the opposition's attack into a kind of comic skit, and he'd always make sure the revolutionary chant overwhelmed the right-wing insult.
And he compared this dramatic interplay to the scene in Casablanca, where the refugees drown out the German soldiers singing Wacht am Rhein by singing the Marseillaise. It really suggests Lemke viewed political action less as ideology and more as, well, cinematic spectacle.
He was a strategist and a showman who just knew the power of a good narrative. But that focus on spectacle eventually led him away from the decentralized idealism of the SDS. He later joined the much more rigid, cadre-based Communist League of West Germany, and here he reportedly became dominant, living this strangely corporate lifestyle, driving a big black Saab, editing party bulletins, a really stark contrast to his old bohemian radical image.
And after the League was disbanded, the rumors about him became just sensational.
They split into two extreme possibilities, and both of them point to this high-stakes opportunism. One rumor suggested he became a cynic, absconded with a huge portion of party funds to America to speculate in stocks.
Wow.
The other, far more dramatic and confirming his reputation for high stakes, was that he had transformed into Carlos, the arch-terrorist.
So either a capitalist or a super terrorist.
Right. Regardless of which rumor was true, the collective perception was that Lemke was a political creature who had transitioned from activism into either highly cynical financial opportunism or extreme high-stakes international violence.
The link is now clear. Wendt admired Lemke, and Lemke used Wendt's position at the hospital to hide Leo. So once the investigator tracks Leo down and drives her into the countryside of the Odenwald, she finally breaks her silence.
She confesses her full involvement in something called Operation Bonfire, with Lemke and two others, Gieselher and Bertram. This operation was rooted in environmental anxiety and, well, a youthful, if reckless, idealism.
What was the specific motive for Operation Bonfire?
The goal was to set a massive fire at an American installation, a highly secretive munitions depot, to force public and media attention onto what was stored there. They were driven by these persistent, volatile rumors of poison gas and genuine concerns over environmental degradation. They were citing forests dying, chemicals in the air and in the water. For them, this was an act of civic responsibility, a way to reveal a military secret they felt threatened the German landscape.
And she insists no one was supposed to be hurt. She frames it as a political stunt to raise awareness. What was her specific physical role in the operation?
She was the lookout. She was securing the getaway path, positioned at the midpoint to watch for patrols and divert them if necessary. She waited for 25 minutes, then she heard shots, followed by two distinct loud explosions.
And she ran.
Terrified, she ran from the compound, cleaned up the soot and blackening on her face, and was eventually picked up by a drunken pharmacist from Schwetzingen who, likely seeing her distress and wanting nothing to do with it, simply drove her to the nearest known facility, the state psychiatric hospital.
This detail of Leo's youthful idealism, setting a bonfire to save the environment, it stands in this horrifying contrast to the grim historical reality of the weapons they feared.
The sources drive this home by drawing a direct parallel to the investigator's own family history. He recalled his father's World War I stories about mustard gas, particularly the terror of sudden permanent blindness. That memory instantly juxtaposes the abstract political idealism of Operation Bonfire with the horrifying, tangible consequences of chemical warfare. It underscores just how close their political stunt came to unleashing a genuine catastrophe, regardless of whether the poison gas rumors were even true.
The situation then rapidly escalates from a private investigation into a public political drama. The Federal Public Prosecutor's Office makes a major announcement.
Right. They announced the arrest of Helmut Lemke and Leonore Salger in Spain and stated they would be extradited, linked to a terrorist attack with casualties. But the announcement was suspicious because it was so highly generalized.
Right.
Very vague. It provided few specifics about the time or, crucially, the place of the alleged attack. This vague public declaration of victory without any substantive details was the first clear sign that the state was managing or manufacturing the narrative. They were trying to claim a win while hiding the volatile details of the actual incident.
So the investigator needed confirmation of Leo's story, and that's where his unlikely contact, the photojournalist Ingo Peschkelek, comes back into the picture. Peschkelek claims he's investigating Wendt's murder because he smells a hot story.
Peschkelek is the essential catalyst for factual truth here. He provided the geographical and temporal clue that tied Leo's confession to an undeniable public record. He revealed an article from a local paper, the Viernheimer Tagblatt, that was published back in March.
And what exactly did a small local paper report that the federal prosecutor's office was concealing?
The article covered a query raised by the Green Party and the district council. They were asking questions about explosions and guards wearing special protective clothing at the American Forces Munitions Depot near Viernheim. And specifically, this event occurred in January.
And that nails it.
It confirms the exact location of Operation Bonfire, the American base near Viernheim, and the exact time. January, precisely when Leo said the attack occurred.
This moved the whole narrative from rumor and confession to a verifiable location. And Peschkelek, who is just desperate for proof, launches into this elaborate stunt that really defines his willingness to commit journalism by felony.
It was an audacious, almost comical plan. Peschkelek and the investigator impersonated German military and presidential staff to infiltrate the American base. The investigator was dressed in a dark suit, playing a representative from the president's office, while Peschkelek played the role of a major from a completely fictitious department.
They even had fake IDs.
Oh yeah, they manufactured fake laminated IDs, which sounds impressive until you hear that Peschkelek's actual military uniform was hilariously ill-fitting.
That detail, the ill-fitting uniform, it just tells you everything about Peschkelek's commitment to spectacle over genuine professionalism.
Exactly. They used this flimsy disguise to corner the American fire chief, claiming they needed information about medals and citations for the guards who responded to the fire, thereby attempting to trick the chief into confirming the specific date of the incident, January 6th.
The scene itself must have been incredibly tense, but also completely absurd.
It was fraught. The investigator was struggling to speak military English and maintain the composure of a presidential representative. And the climax of the deception happens when Peschkelek, sensing the American officer's attention was focused on the investigator, grabbed the leg of the investigator's chair and forcefully yanked it back, sending him crashing to the floor.
That's betrayal by chair pull.
Total betrayal. And while the American officer was distracted, rushing to help the stunned investigator who was now lying on the floor, Peschkelek snatched the crucial file binder right off the desk. It was a classic, if deeply unethical, move, sacrificing his partner's dignity and safety for the ultimate scoop.
That stolen American file is the absolute core of the truth the state is trying to bury. So what did that report, Regulation 937 LC 0102, what did it reveal?
Well, the report confirmed the attack on January 6th. It detailed the mechanics, the fence was cut, the alarm sounded, and the search was hindered by fog. But the most important detail for confirming the official military nature of the response was the line stating that guards fired according to Regulation 937 LC 0102.
Okay, let's pause on that regulation number for a second. Why is that specific, seemingly arbitrary sequence of numbers and letters so important?
Because it confirms the incident was not a simple break-in managed by base security. It was a defined military operation governed by codified rules of engagement. If that regulation number exists, it means the entire procedure, from the cutting of the fence to the firing of weapons, was legally authorized and documented within a complex military system. It instantly elevates the matter far above the level of a spontaneous terror incident and into the realm of international military protocol.
And what did the regulation confirm about the human cost of this?
The casualty report was precise and tragic. One intruder, Giselher Berger, one of Leo's co-conspirators, was killed, and crucially, one American guard, Ray Sachs, was also killed. A second intruder, Bertram Monhoff, was injured and taken into custody.
So 2 of Leo's 3 partners were killed or captured. That validates her confession about the shots and the explosions.
It does. But the ultimate denial in the report completely shatters the political justification for Operation Bonfire. Well, the entire foundation of Leo and Lemke's plan was this pervasive fear of poison gas. The report explicitly and unequivocally states the key denial. The second explosion did ignite stored chemicals, and the fire was quickly extinguished, but no toxic substances were released. The public rumors of poison gas that fueled the entire operation were unfounded, at least in this specific incident.
Which makes the deaths of the intruder and the guard just senseless.
Exactly, senseless, driven by a political fear that, while maybe legitimate in a broader sense, did not materialize in the immediate context of the attack.
So now we understand what happened, but we still need to understand the why behind the institutional cover-up. And it turns out the primary motivation wasn't political security, but failed media opportunism.
The investigator follows Peshkolek's tracks and finds his studio, which contains these binders detailing an incredible scheme. Peshkolek was collaborating directly with Helmut Lemke. Lemke was not a committed terrorist. He was a calculated strategic gambler playing the role of the fanatic terrorist just to sell a story, and Peshkolek was the producer of the spectacle.
They were trying to monetize the act of terrorism itself.
That's exactly it. They planned to sell the full package for 1,000,000 marks, a monumental sum at the time. This package included an 80-page manuscript, which was Lemke's confession, likely ghostwritten by Peshkolek to maximize the sensationalism, and a video of the Viernheim attack, complete with still photographs enclosed as proof of the video's quality.
So Lemke was always the showman, using his Casablanca strategies not for political revolution, but for financial gain. The entire incident, casualties and all, was designed to create a media-feeding frenzy.
It reveals the deep, deep cynicism at the heart of Lemke's evolution. He used youthful environmental idealism to stage a high-stakes financial gamble, but the plan failed completely. They pitched this material to everyone, major broadcasters like ZDF, tabloid press, international magazines, and no one bought it.
But why did it fail? If they had the confession, the footage, the evidence of the attack.
Because the state's institutional denial, spearheaded by agents Franz and Oatz, was just too effective. The police, the American forces, the media that had been briefed on the official denial, they all refused to play along. They either denied the attack took place or simply showed skepticism because the official narrative contradicted Lemke's material. This institutional apathy just robbed Lemke and Peshkolek's spectacular terrorism of its monetary value. It proves that sometimes simply refusing to acknowledge a spectacle can be the most powerful tool against it.
The failed monetization of the Viernheim tragedy and the discovery of Wendt's map finally allows the investigator to connect all the dots and identify the murderer.
Peshkolek is revealed as the killer of Dr. Wendt. The implied motive was silencing him. Wendt either refused to cooperate with the media scheme because he was still protecting Leo, or perhaps Peshkolek needed to ensure Wendt couldn't reveal the source of the map, which confirmed the Viernheim location that Peshkolek so desperately needed to monetize.
But Peshkolek's eventual confession is filled with the same self-serving narrative as the rest of his life.
It's the ultimate act of spin, isn't it? Peshkolek eventually confessed, but he claimed he had only taken the gun to frighten him a little. He then claimed he only fired it after he realized Wendt was already dead, maybe from fright or natural causes.
It's an attempt to mitigate his culpability.
Completely, claiming he didn't technically murder a living man while still admitting he was involved and fired the weapon. The sources leave the exact sequence a bit ambiguous, focusing instead on his underlying intent, which was to coerce or silence Wendt.
And Peshkolek was always steps ahead, even tracking the investigator.
Yes. The investigator discovers that Peshkolek had installed a wiretap, listening to his private calls with his girlfriend, Brigitte. Peshkolek, realizing the game was over, made one final, desperate move. He tried to destroy all the evidence, the binders of his failed scheme, potentially the stolen American file, by setting his studio on fire, and hoping the investigator would be caught in the blaze.
Peshkolek is severely burned and arrested in the hospital, and the fire destroys much of the physical proof. But this chaos brings the investigator face-to-face with the ultimate systemic cover-up when he meets again with Agents Franz and Rawitz of the agency.
And this is the critical moment where the state unveils its policy of, well, manufactured reality. The agents confirm they arrested an individual who confessed to a different attack one in a place called Keffertal.
And this Keffertal incident.
It's pure political fiction, a narrative they're actively constructing and selling to the public and to the courts.
And they lay out their chilling, pragmatic rationale for protecting this massive, institutional lie. And the language they use to justify it is incredibly strong.
Their rationale is rooted entirely in preventing mass hysteria. They admit that a trial centering on the actual Viernheim attack and the accompanying public discourse about rumors of American poison gas would be unacceptable. Agent Rawitz in particular stressed the fear that a real trial would cause mass panic, potentially branding the town like Chernobyl.
The Chernobyl comparison defines the stakes, doesn't it?
Yeah.
They are willing to sacrifice truth to prevent the perceived destruction of public order and local economies over a threat. The poison gas that the American file confirmed didn't even materialize in this specific incident.
They argue that they have to diffuse the story. To maintain stability, they need a clean, manageable narrative, hence the fictional Kaffertal incident. The only way to stop the spiral of panic and political exploitation is to create a less dangerous fiction that allows the judicial system to process a terrorist threat without detonating a public relations crisis about military secrets and environmental contamination.
And this leads to the moral core of the entire investigation, the deal the investigator has to make.
He agrees to suppress his knowledge of the American file, conveniently allowing the state to believe it was lost in Peshkolek's fire. And in exchange, Leo is guaranteed her freedom. This compromise allows the agency to proceed with their fabricated Keffertal narrative, ensuring order is maintained, and crucially, sparing Leo the show trial and potential conviction that would inevitably follow if the real Viernheim truth and the resultant political firestorm ever came out.
So the investigator sacrifices factual truth for a practical resolution and to save a life. What happens to Leo immediately afterward?
She is released from prison, and in this really interesting act of psychological self-preservation, she voluntarily checks herself back into the state psychiatric hospital.
Wow.
This action ensures she avoids the trial and conviction entirely, but it also signifies a profound retreat. She's disillusioned. The idealism of Operation Bonfire has been shattered by murder, betrayal, and the harsh reality that she was manipulated by Lemke.
And the investigator ties up one last loose end.
He does. He makes sure to provide her with the 400 francs she worried she couldn't repay. It's a small, personal, financial rectification amidst this massive governmental deception.
This entire cynical transaction, this successful deception, draws the immediate, fierce judgment of Chief Inspector Nagelsbach.
And Nagelsbach's confrontation really defines the investigator's unique position outside the law. Nagelsbach calls him a successful deceiver, arguing that the traditional rules of law enforcement don't apply to him and that he considers himself above the law's necessity for transparency.
And the investigator defends this independence with great force. He maintains that being an outsider is essential to seeing clearly. He chose this path when he left his previous career as a prosecutor because, as he says, he was done with others laying out for me what is just and unjust.
Right.
He argues that his own ethical calculus, in this specific case, mandated saving a life and achieving a practical, non-catastrophic resolution, even if it meant violating the letter of the law that the state itself was already actively circumventing.
It's a deep philosophical argument, isn't it? It's about whether justice is better served by rigid adherence to legal truth or by practical, compassionate manipulation of a situation when the institutions themselves are based on lies.
It's the ultimate gray area, a deliberate, negotiated exchange of official truth for personal freedom and public stability. So what does this entire complex web of missing persons, murder, staged terrorism, and institutional deals ultimately mean for us, the listeners, who are trying to be well-informed?
I think this case serves as a powerful study in manufactured reality. The official state narrative, the fictional Keffertal attack, is a necessary lie. It's designed not to deceive the public entirely, but to channel their anxieties toward a manageable, less volatile narrative. The lie was deemed essential to prevent mass panic caused by the political exploitation of the actual Viernheim incident and the accompanying, though unfounded, fears of environmental catastrophe. The state chose fiction to preserve order.
This deep dive revealed a profound and, well, cynical knowledge nugget. That the truth is often less powerful than well-managed silence. Sometimes, carefully constructed deception, administered even by institutions sworn to protect the public, is considered the most effective tool to maintain stability in a world terrified of chaos and vulnerability.
Yeah.
The institutions decided that the public just couldn't handle the truth, that their neighbors, perhaps driven by idealism, were dying over unconfirmed rumors near a potentially volatile military base.
And we should remember that the investigator, despite his successful maneuvering, didn't escape the judgment of the system entirely. Nagelsbach gave him a final, potent symbol, a matchstick model of a prison. It symbolized the fate the investigator had deliberately avoided for himself and for Leo, but also perhaps the cage he now occupied, the self-imposed isolation of the successful deceiver.
Which brings us to our final thought for you, the learner. The investigator found himself facing an impossible ethical crossroad. He could suppress a volatile truth, expose a political scam, confirm institutional failure, but in doing so, he would save a young woman's life and prevent mass, state-predicted panic. He chose to become a successful deceiver. If you were faced with the same scenario, where the truth promised chaos and the lie promised stability in life, would you insist on transparency, regardless of the destruction it might unleash, or would you follow the investigator's path? It's a question that asks where your allegiance truly lies, with the law or with practical quiet justice.